Greetings! In this video we will take an introductory look at the Arnold Render engine. We'll make sure that it's loaded first of all. We'll come to Render Settings here, this icon, and Render Using, and when you open this tab you should see Maya Software, Maya Hardware, Arnold Renderer, and Maya Vector. If any of those weren't available to you, the Arnold or the Maya Vector, that means that the plugin wasn't loaded properly, and we can do this manually. We can come to Windows, Settings Preferences, Plugin Manager, Windows Settings Preferences, Plugin Manager, and if you scroll down to the bottom and come up just a bit, you will see the MTOA bundle. That's Maya to Arnold bundle. Make sure that Loaded and Auto Load are selected, and you can hit Refresh. And if the Maya Vector wasn't available, you could scroll up a little bit more, and you'll see Vector Render Bundle, and just make sure Loaded and Auto Load are selected and hit Refresh. And then when you come back to your render settings, this icon here, you can see Render Using, and you'll have those available. And we'll be using all four of these render engines this semester. Today we're just taking a real basic look at Arnold Renderer. Now let me mention, if we left it on Maya Software and we were to click the render button here, we would see an illuminated scene. There are default lights using Maya. But if we switch to Arnold Render and we click on the render icon, we'll see that there is no lights by default with the Arnold Render engine. So our first task is to create a light. We'll go ahead and come up to Arnold Lights, and here are the list of lights. I've made my Arnold tab available. If you were over in the Poly Modeling tab, you could come out and click on Arnold. And you see the list of icons that are the shortcut for these menu items here. And then one more point of clarification, be reminded that the Maya lights listed under Create Lights are separate from the Arnold lights. But these four in the middle, directional, point light, spotlight, and area light, can work with the Arnold render. Ambient light and volume light do not work. And in fact, today we'll use the directional light and we'll manipulate the Arnold attributes of this Maya directional light. But first, let's create just general illumination in the scene. We'll come to Arnold Lights Sky Dome Light. And now when we render it, again, I'm going to click this icon here in the render settings. We can see that Arnold is available. And if I were to click the render icon here, we'll see that now the scene has illumination. And this is that sky dome giving us a general illumination throughout the scene. First thing I'm going to do while the sky dome is selected is just turn this down. We'll come to 0.5. Now if you'd clicked off your sky dome, let me close these windows. If you clicked on something else and you wanted to get it back, recall that your outliner has a list of all of your nodes here, and we could click on the Sky Dome light node, and we see all of the attributes here in the attribute window. Right, channel box, modeling toolkit, attribute editor in conjunction with the Sky Dome selection means that we can change the attributes here. And what I've changed is just the intensity down to 0.5. And I'll one last time click on this render icon, and we'll see that this is rendering. It's not in real time. And one of the powerful things about Arnold is that it has a nice real-time render engine. So let's talk about that before we proceed. I'm going to close this render view. And if you look in the Arnold tab, the final two icons, this is the Arnold render view, and this is the render icon for Arnold. It's also listed here, Arnold Render, and then Open Arnold Render View. So I'll click on the render view, and let's place this in our windows. We'll grab this at the top and slide it over till you see the blue line, and then you can drop it, and now that's listed there. I'm going to minimize the outliner, and I'll put my cursor right in the middle, and we'll give ourselves more space to view our scene, our workspace, and this will give us the opportunity to view our render here. Let's take a look. We'll render this as a square for today's project. So let's set that. We'll click the render settings icon. And note that regardless of which render engine we have selected, the first tab is common. And so this is common to all the rendering agents here. I'll set it back to Arnold Render. And we have common, and we'll make this a JPEG. So our image format in the common tab of the render settings is JPEG. And then the only other thing we'll do is we'll come down and we'll make this a 1K square. 1K square. So quick review, I clicked on the render settings and I chose JPEG as the image format and I chose image size 1K square. And now when we go to click render, it'll update here. We see that square. And this is happening in real time. I can rotate around and you'll see that it renders. It takes a moment and you can see a percent of the render down here. Now, if you have a laptop or you're working on a computer that doesn't have a very powerful processor, or maybe you have very little RAM, having this on all the time may cause you problems. So there is a stop button here. We can click this icon. In fact, I can hear my fans on my computer heating up because this is an intensive process rendering in real time. So if I press stop here, you can see that I can now maneuver about the scene, make changes in the scene, and this isn't updating in real time. So it's really nice to have it update in real time, but sometimes it's too taxing on your processor and you want to press stop. Do some of the work that you're after and then go ahead and press the play and it will re-render. And you can see the percent running down here. Now, the great thing about the interactive or the real-time isn't just moving about, it's that we're able to change our lights. So let's come again to the outliner and we'll click the sky dome just to make this available. And you can see as I change the light, seeing it update in real time is what's really valuable. I'll go ahead and set that intensity back to 0.5. Now, I mentioned that the sky dome gives us kind of general illumination. We're not working with reflections yet. That's the other forte of the sky dome light, is providing general reflections throughout the scene. But we're just using it for illumination, and we've set this down to 0.5. And now let's create a main light, a so-called main light, the main light in the scene. And we'll use one of our Maya lights. So once again, the ambient light and the volume light don't work, but directional, point, spot, and area do work with Arnold Render. We just have to make a few adjustments. So I'm going to click on the directional light, and we'll hit the T key, T on the keyboard. That gives us our manipulator, and you can see here now that we've got the light, and I can raise that, and you see that it's updating here in real time. And this makes it easy to place the light and to aim and direct the light. Now, the intensity here is listed in our attributes. And let me just click off to make sure you know how to get back to your light. So I've got my outliner available to me. I've come down and I've created this directional light. I'll click on it again. And as long as my attribute editor is open, this icon here, if it weren't, you'll see your attributes. And I'm on the directional light shape 1. And here is my intensity. We're going to leave that alone. We're going to skip down to Arnold. So there's an Arnold tab on those 4 Maya lights. And this is really where we want to change the intensities here, listed as exposure. And then there are 2 other attributes that we'll be manipulating today. The angle, which gives us the softness of a shadow, the further away it is from the casting source. And then our samples, which is the quality of the render. But you can see we don't have a ground plane. And so there's nothing for our blocks here to cast onto. So let's come back to the poly modeling and we'll create a polyplane, this icon here. Now when I click it, it doesn't appear as though anything happened. I could hit the 4 key, click on the panel and hit the 4 key, and I can see that it's there. Also, you can see as I'm moving around now, I'm working on scaling up this plane. I don't need this to be rendering in real time, so I'm just going to hit the stop button, right? This allows me to move around and work without it continually re-rendering if I don't need that real-time feedback, right? Why tax the computer processor? So we'll grab the scale tool and we'll scale up this ground plane. I'll come back to the 6 or 5 mode so that we can see this. Now, a couple of icons on our panel. The light itself, we can click and we can get a feedback in our working view of the light, and then we can click on this icon here to see the shadows. Now, if we press play, we'll get that feedback, but this plane, and we'll scale this plane up a little bit more, it isn't the same color as the sky dome. We could try to make that color work, but we can also make a matte shadow in Arnold, which will capture the shadow but be invisible to the rest of the scene. And this will give us a seamless background between our foreground elements, our ground plane, and our background. It'll create the appearance of a studio setting. So with my plane selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a new material. So I've right clicked the plane and we'll pull down to assign new material. And we'll click on the Arnold tab and we'll come down to AI Shadow Matte. AI Shadow Matte. And when we click on that, you can see that the plane is now invisible to the Arnold render. It's only capturing the shadows, but we don't see the actual plane itself. Now there's a couple of things that we can do here, or one in particular, which is our shadows are black, which is a little bit harsh, and then we have the hard outline, which we'll solve in the light itself. So I'm going to just bring up the shadow color a little bit, make it seem a little bit more natural in this environment. And I'll mention again, how do we get back here? Well, if I were to click off, say I've clicked on another object, I can come back to the poly plane, and then remember that our shader is always the furthest tab out in the attribute editor. And here it is if we wanted to make some update to the shadow. So make sure that you can get back to any of these attributes that we're working with today. And then the final thing that we'll do is on the light itself, you can see that these shadows are hard. I'm going to go ahead and minimize the outliner so we can see this a little bit better. And because now we're working on the render, we'll give it a little bit more space. And I'm just using my option, or that would be Alt on the PC to maneuver and make this larger. Right, my right mouse button to zoom in and out, and my middle mouse button to track up, down, left, right. And so now we can see the quality of the render taking place here. But this shadow shouldn't be hard all the way out. The further away the shadow is, the softer it should become. And we accomplish that with the directional light, and this is called the angle. Now once again, I'm going to hit the Q key. I'm going to click off just so that you can be reminded of how to get back to the light. I'll come to the outliner. I'll select the directional light. I'll go ahead and minimize the outliner. My attribute editor is available to me, and I'm looking at the directional light shape 1. This is the Maya directional light that we're using in Arnold, and we're down on the Arnold tab of this Maya directional light. I've cranked up my exposure here to 1.768, and as I mentioned, we want to soften this shadow the further away it gets, and that means increasing the angles. So I'll put a 5 there. And we can see that now it's getting softer. And if we were to really crank that up, let's say to 10, even softer. And you can play with increasing this. It takes longer to render the greater this number, but the more realistic the shadow you'll get. Or, of course, if it's the effect that you're after, you'll increase the angle here. Now, we can see that it's dotted. I'm not sure if you can see this in the video, but on your own screen, you'll notice that there are dots here. And that has to do with the quality of the shadow. So we'll come now and increase the samples. And if we put that to 3, and then we have to wait, right? So it looks as though it's done, but you have to keep an eye down here. And now this is at 26%, 30%, and you can see that it's taking a while to render. So with my angle up to 10 and my samples up to 3, you can see that it really slowed down the render. And in fact, I'll put that angle, let's say back to 5. And that's about where we want it. And we'll let that render. This is a 1K square. You'll save this JPEG and upload it to the bulletin board for this week's assignment on the Introduction to Arnold Rendering. And it's as simple as coming now to File, save image, save that into a location where you can find it, however your file management is on your local computer. And this is the image that you will upload to Canvas and to the bulletin board found on the assignments page. All right, questions in the technical discussion? Have a good day.